Kevin Feige and director Jon Favreau. Thanks for coming, guys.
Well, you.
So I want to talk to you about the MCU and its 10th anniversary, but Kevin, do you want to give people like a brief history of Marvel before this started? Because Marvel was around making films for Marvel before them.
Marvel was a comic book company at first. I did that. Yes. I started at Marvel 18 years ago, having been a part of the first X-Men film. And the film that I did soon after starting, that they were just getting into prep on, was Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film. So for the first 6 years or so, we were a part of a lot of other studio films. Universal was doing the Hulk film, Fox had the X-Men films, Sony had the Spider-Man films.
And there was a Daredevil movie too, I hear.
There was a Daredevil movie with a great plot and a
Really good cast, except for one guy.
a couple of Fantastic Four movies, Electra, and they all made money. And it was fun to be a part of that. For me, it was fun to see how all the different studios worked and the inner workings of each studio. And Marvel did not have a lot of power contractually. But we sort of had a right to be there, and what I tried to do was earn the trust of everybody involved and become a creative partner. And they didn't have to listen to us, but we would try to get them to listen to us. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we didn't. And around 2006, we ended up getting financing to do it ourselves. And Iron Man was the first film of Marvel Studios, which people also forget, John doesn't forget, Iron Man 1 was an independent movie with a completion bond company, with foreign pre-sales, everything that comes along with an independent movie. None of them afterwards were independent, but this one was.
John, what was your first involvement with Marvel? Was it when you acted in Daredevil?
Yeah, I acted in Daredevil. I met Avi Arad, who was a producer on all the films Kevin mentioned, and he had a relationship with Marvel previous to it sort of overlapped with the toy business, and he comes out of that's where he started off, and but he was a producer on Daredevil. I had gotten to know him there, and we kind of remained in contact. I had worked with Mark Steven Johnson on a movie called Replacements that he was doing rewrites on. And so I met him there, and then when the role of Foggy Nelson came up, I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. I did that, and I remember they were all going to Comic-Con, and I didn't make the cut. And, I was like, what's Comic-Con? It sounds really cool. And then the movie did okay. It wasn't a hit, it wasn't a bomb, and it was fun to be a part of. And then after I had that relationship kept going, and I had started to direct more films. I'd become more of a filmmaker than a character.
Was Elf before or after Daredevil?
It was after.
It was after.
It was after, and so as my name was popping up on lists, I knew Avi, and as Kevin pointed out, it wasn't like this was a prime piece of material. Everybody thought that the superhero thing might have worn out its welcome, and to remember back then it was Nolan was doing The Dark Knight and all the super cool Batman.
That was the same summer, right? Dark Knight came out. Batman Begins came out a couple years before, but Dark Knight was after you guys, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it pretty much breathed new life into the genre because it was making money, getting good reviews, and he's a fantastic filmmaker, and so we were kind of the off-brand because Batman was the thing, and it was kind of good to be in their shadow, to be honest with you, because it allowed us to have the freedom to just do our thing, and nobody expected much of us. There was a certain amount of money that the Marvel movies had made, and there was a bit of a formula as Marvel started their studio, is spend a certain amount of money, have a certain amount of action sequences, the hero's the star, so you don't need a big star to sell the movie, and if you spend the right amount of money, you'll make the right amount of money, and it's a good business. We got really lucky with Robert because he was doing it for, he was not an expensive movie star at the time. And so we were able, I wasn't an expensive director, he was an expensive movie star, and we really put it together like an independent film, and then we attracted people that would have normally been in independent movies, like Jeff Bridges and Gwyneth, and then that's when it started to get kind of cool, because we were, as long as the action sequences were going to be on point, everybody at Marvel kind of knew that was, we were doing our job, and then everything else between the action sequences, we got to have a lot of fun and freedom and a lot of improv and a lot of, just the tone that we came up with here came out of a lot of, first in the scripting process, then while we're shooting, and then the editing room, and then some some limited reshoots, we really found the personality of this. And people really like the idea of Robert coming back, and people really like the idea of this hero, the tech too, the CGI, the hard surface CGI had really gotten good with ILM. They had just done Transformers. So I started to become convinced that maybe we didn't have to do everything practically in certain areas. And so for the first time, you could show a superhero do the stuff that you saw in this movie. And so that was sort of a lucky confluence of events and trends and technologies and people who were at the point in their career that, we knew enough to be able to make the film, but we also were early enough in our career to take chances and not really be scared to try something different that we like. But right up till the very end, we didn't know how it was going to turn out. We knew we liked it, but we were biting our nails all the way through, pretty much till that first Comic-Con where we revealed the first footage. And that's kind of when we knew that people would like it as much as we did.
It was a Paramount release, and they did a good job marketing it and distributing it, but they didn't have much skin in the game. We were paying for it. They would get a small percentage of the profits, and they really did do a good job, and obviously because the movie did so well and was marketed so well. But they were doing another movie that came out 3 weeks after us that they had a big stake in, which was the next Indiana Jones movie. And the first Indiana Jones movie in however many years.
19 years, yeah.
In 19 years. So from Comic-Con to every marketing meeting we kept thinking we were second fiddle to Indiana Jones, and it didn't feel that way coming out of that first Comic-Con.
Well, it's funny, I was going to ask you about that, because I remember that summer, it's like, whatever you think of the movie, Indiana Jones is the greatest hero ever, and it had been a long time, and you guys actually made more money than they did, like in the U.S. Like, you were very close, and I remember...
You would not have believed that if you told us.
Yeah, I was going to ask, it's like,
A week
when that
before.
someone said, hey, you guys are actually going to outgross Indiana Jones by a couple $1 million, like, would you have believed it?
We didn't know. It's a weird thing, and I don't know if any of you have worked on something where you believe fully that it's terrible and going to bomb, and you also believe that it's going to outperform everybody's wildest expectation. It's a strange. It's part of the creative process, I think, where you don't really have a gauge, and so you just have to put the work in every day, do your best job. It's like I think Paul Thomas Anderson said about the editing process that you look at the assembly and it's terrible, and you work on it every day, and each day it sucks a little bit less, and then one day it becomes good or great. You don't know when you pass that line. So all you can concentrate on is the work, is not being lazy, is being open to new ideas, and challenging yourself, and not sort of, not giving up the opportunity to make the most of an opportunity. And I think that's where we really did, that was one of the things I learned from working with Kevin, was he was constantly challenging, and Robert also, in different ways, was constantly challenging the material, the dialogue. We would stay up and rewrite a scene, and we'd come in the next day, and Robert would say, no, we got to work on this. And I would be like, we signed off on it last night. Like, we stayed all night so we could finish this, and finally he says, I think I just don't like paper. Like, if he sees it on paper, he doesn't like the dialogue. But the point was, he would always challenge it to make it better, to discover something new. In the editing room, Kevin's very much that way. And it would be about finding everything you could in the cut, and then, it would be just, if we just had this one scene or this one line of dialogue, it would really tie it all together. And it was the first time I ever done a reshoot where the movie got much better from the reshoot. Usually as an actor, when you're asked to do a reshoot, it's kind of haphazard, it's desperate. It doesn't end up in the movie most of the time. But with this, we had a real surgical, like week-long set of reshoots that really crystallized everything and turned it into the movie that you saw. So I think it's a work ethic too, and I think it's a commitment to doing the best you can. And that's what part of what's good about this business is it's not an easy business to get into. So by the time you get your opportunity, you are incentivized to work 110%. And I had never been that way at other jobs and other things in life. But when you work really hard for something and you have passion, when you get there, you inherit all of that momentum and energy that took for you to get there. And everybody around you has gone through the same process. Everybody I work with in this business loves what they do. Otherwise, they would be doing something else. And so there's something about what comes out of a process where people are completely mindful and enthusiastic and bringing everything they have to bear. And that's really what I enjoy about this, because we hadn't seen this movie in a long time. I look at it and I see flaws in it and things. And if I could tell the story, Jeff Bridges on this movie, we were up doing rewrites and figuring out what tomorrow's work's going to be. And of course, there wasn't enough time because it was a basically relatively low budget negative pickup for the scope of what we're doing. And Bridges was like, "Hey guys, come to my trailer for a drink after wrap." And me and Kevin are like, "We have to rewrite tomorrow's scene," and Robert's waiting to see. And we're like, "Oh, we got to go. Let's Jeff Bridges. We got to go in there." So we go in there, and it's the dude. So we're in there with the dude, and his stand-in was there, mixing, shaking martinis, and he was there.
Stand-in does.
His does. That's why I thanked him at the Oscars, and so he's there. And he's relaxing in like a robe, and he's getting out of his bald. No, he was bald. It wasn't a bald wig, yeah. And we're sitting and talking, and he's totally relaxed, and we're pretending to be relaxed. And as he's talking, he said, "Yeah, we did a good scene today. That was pretty cool. What we did, I wasn't expecting that. It was a really good moment." And then he stops himself. He says, he says, "The movie, that's just the skin of the snake." He says, this is the real thing. Do you remember that? I guess he meant like the process of making the movie and the camaraderie and those memories. And he's right. Like, the movies are great, but you start off thinking, I can't wait to have the poster on my wall or see my name on the screen or be in something or make a movie. But really, it's that process. And a lot of the people we work with on these movies don't even watch them. Maybe they see it once. Maybe they see it at the premiere, if that. But they love making them. And that's the fun part of going to work, is being together with people like that.
That's awesome. Well, I want to back up for a second to see how we led to you directing this. So this is your first movie. You're starting a new studio. First of all, why Iron Man? I mean, a lot of your other characters were sort of out there, but you had obviously other ones to sort of look at. What made Iron Man the one you guys wanted to do first?
We had everything except, as I said before, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Hulk. Which at the time, if you didn't read comics, you thought that's all Marvel were those other characters. So we knew that we had the rights to everything else, but at the time, everything else didn't mean a whole lot to the world. New Line had been developing an Iron Man film for many years.
With Tom Cruise, right? For a while?
No, never officially, but he sort of talked about it at one point. Did we ever talk about Tom Cruise after you started? Yeah, like there was some initial conversation, and I remember a deal term memo came through on a fax machine, and it was like, oh, no, forget that. So we knew the character had great potential, and we knew that potential wasn't coming to life in what New Line was doing. So what Marvel had done for years and years and years up to that point was a studio would try to develop something, they'd develop it for years, they couldn't get it going. They had to pay Marvel just, I don't know exactly what the amount was, but a relatively very small amount, a few $1,000s, to extend the rights for another however many years. And this had been going on for years and years. We were getting our own financing, we were getting our own studio, and the expiration date came up, and New Line said, okay, we'd like to do this. And Avi said, no, we're going to take it back. And I think they were sort of surprised. And it was then that we said, let's make this first. It wasn't a super soldier from World War II. It wasn't a Norse god with a hammer. It was an easier entry point. And it was a great character. Tony Stark's a great character with a great origin story, and something that we believed we could pull off and could be unique from the X-Men's and the Spider-Mans that had come before us.
So John, what drew you to want to do this?
You gotta remember, these offices were like new offices above a Mercedes dealership on Beverly Boulevard. It wasn't like on a big studio lot, and it felt very much like what Kevin describes. It wasn't set up by people who had been in the movie business, and it wasn't like inheriting the traditions, what you normally see when you go in there. But there were all the cool comic book stuff, like the maquettes and the sculptures, and the first meeting. And I remember there was talk about Hulk also. That was another title. So that was going to be their first two. And it was more of a general conversation. There wasn't a script yet. It was just I knew who Iron Man was and Tony Stark was from growing up reading the old comics. And I remember being really intimidated by, because I was not into CGI at all then. I felt I was very much into practical effects. If you look at other films I had done before it, I had done forced perspective, stop motion, motion control, miniatures. I really liked the stuff I grew up with, like the old Star Wars stuff and all that 80s tech. And CG, with rare exception, I felt it was overused. It wasn't used well. But Jurassic Park was great, but then it never seemed to hit that high watermark again. And then and Hulk really was. I didn't think, because Eileen had already done Hulk, the
2003 version
of Hulk, right? And so I didn't trust the workflow and what CGI was capable of, especially with organic. But with the hard surfaces, it's a lot. It really holds up. Even the old stuff, even like the Pixar Luxo Jr. holds up incredibly well, or Tin Toy. So the idea of Iron Man felt much easier of a sell. And I also like the notion of Tony Stark as being somebody who wasn't just a kid. Sort of Peter Parker's more the classic story, a kid coming of age, and that's the monolith you're dealing with. And this was a little bit different because it was somebody who was conflicted and somebody with a checkered past who was being reborn in a sense and having a moral awakening. And for the point in my life I felt I could relate more to a character like that. And I hadn't directed a lot of movies at the time, and it's always better if you could find somebody you could personally connect with. And I thought that was an intriguing myth to explore.
So what was it about Jon that you thought he was the right guy for this?
There had been a number of meetings. There was a relationship, as Jon said, on Daredevil, and Avi had stayed in touch with him. But the truth is, I thought Elf was brilliant, and again, now it's a classic, and you see it, and people cheer for it because it gets better and better, and more of a classic every year. But even before we were thinking about doing Iron Man ourselves, I remember watching Elf and going, "This is an incredibly well done film." And I still contend that Santa getting the energy back in his sleigh through Central Park and flying up with it's one of the best action sequences ever put together. You know exactly what the rules are, you know what the mythology is, you know what's at stake. It was great. And I remember sitting in the theater going, why do I have chills at this Will Ferrell comedy with his flag flying around? This took a deft hand. And as there were, other people in the mix and talking to, I, at least for myself, kept thinking back to that moment. Not to mention Nate and not to mention Swingers and Zathura, but really that moment is what I thought. And he came in and had nothing but great ideas. And I remember then one of the first meetings suggested the structure of the opening of the movie. Maybe in the very first meeting, suggested starting the X and then going back and meeting him to the cave.
I was thinking while watching it, in that, I love the first 45 minutes, but I was just imagining if you went into a studio and pitched that your main character is going to be in a cave tinkering with stuff for the first half hour of the movie, that most studios were like, no, you're not going to do that, but it's some of my favorite stuff in the movie. Were you guys worried about that, or do you feel really confident? It's okay.
We were worried about everything. It wasn't it's a whole different, but we had the benefit of low expectations, which I can't overstate how important that is in your career. Everybody wants build up and no, the opposite. Over deliver, surprise people, and they'll always love you if you give them more than they think they're going to get. It becomes harder for this guy here because he's got to top everything.
That's why I was catatonic in the days leading up to Infinity War coming out.
But you've been doing it, it's some run, and just, it's been really fun for me because I've gotten to be part of the family and participate either as, a supporting figure or an actor in it, and got to be part of the experience of it. But this guy's had to sweat it out, white knuckle it through 19 films where everybody is looking to Marvel to do something special. And I have to say, look, I think we got lucky to a certain extent here. We worked hard, but things broke our way. But to have a run like you've had for so long, luck is out of the equation. I mean, you've really found a way to deliver and surprise and stretch yourself and take chances. And so I really love, as somebody who's part of the starting of this, to see how the legacy has been continuing and the chances that you continue to take in the spirit of what we did here. So thank you, Kevin.
Very kind of you, sir. The truth is, we learned almost all of it working with John on Iron Man 1. Not only a collaborative process, but their people. Lou Esposito, our co-president, worked with John on Zathura, came on to line produce, executive produce this movie. We hired him. Now he's done all 19 movies. Victoria Alonso came in through Lou and through John and Dan Liebenthal, the director, who did this film for us, worked with John in the past, is currently, probably still right now, finishing Ant-Man and the Wasp for us, having done Spider-Man and all sorts of movies for us. Brian Meinerden, who I hope you guys know, he's a brilliant artist who has brought almost all of our characters to life, started with John, who worked with him on a film prior to starting with Iron Man. And even the process of doing visual development meetings every week, or multiple times a week, started with John. We were a studio, but we were also producers. And we had to find our way in that, because that's sort of an unusual combination. And it was John who, and there are ways, he could have been very protective. He could have closed himself off. He could have asked for a door with a lock on it to keep us out and only send things. And maybe tried to do that early on, I don't remember. But it became very open. And it was like, well, why am I telling getting notes from 5 different people 5 different times? Everybody come in, let's throw it up on the screen, talk about it in the moment, make a decision, and move on. And we now do that. We've done that for 20 plus films now. And it started with John and him being so creatively open to it. And I just take it for granted. That's the way you make movies. There's still sometimes people come into the process and go, wait, how is this working? What are we doing? And they quickly pick up on it because they know this is the way it is. But it all started with you. And the tonality of having moments that are really serious. When Tony Stark said, when Pepper sees him killing himself and is nervous for him and is crying, saying, I can't do this anymore. And he says, I finally know what I have to do and I know that it's right. That's as serious and heartfelt as you get. And at the same time, the robots that spray him with fire extinguishers. That's the secret.
Let's talk about the tone, because I really think, like, you guys did establish a tone that you carried forward in all the other Marvel movies, but it was coming out of a time where, like the Nolan Batman and everything, like the Bourne movies, were just really dark. And like for me growing up, like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, like Indiana Jones, there was a lot of humor in those movies, but it felt like we were in a time when it kind of moved away from that. And I feel like you guys kind of brought it back. Like how did you find that tone of kind of real but fun, where you have those amazingly human moments, but then you also have this great, remind me of Chaplin with like Downey with all the things sort of pulling on him and like the comedy of the, the fire extinguisher and stuff.
I mean, to me, I look at the masters like a painter would, and one name that always pops up, I'll always watch, is Buster Keaton, because he really knew how to work the frame and really use technology and film technique to make laughs. And that's a big thing of what we do here. You do it on all movies, but especially when you're dealing with CGI, where you might not see versions of it for weeks or months, and you're trying to create something that's spontaneous and immediate. But Buster Keaton would set up these crazy gags with, sides of buildings falling down, and not to mention stunts and things like that, and find humor in action. And looking at filmmakers like that, looking at other filmmakers who had done superhero films before, but ultimately it was about making us laugh, because you really can't tell what people are going to like. And the more specific you get, and the more you gear it towards your own personal sense of humor, it's not intuitively self-evident, but the more specific you make it, the more universal it tends to play. And when you try to make something that pleases everybody, you end up pleasing nobody, or just making something very mediocre. And fear often guides you to try to satisfy a lot of people. I think part of what the responsibility that was lifted was because it wasn't a comedy. We could just make it funny or not funny, and I wasn't being judged by laughs. I had come off the Elf where they let me do anything with the action sequences, but the humor, every joke is scrutinized, because that's where everybody's coming from. They're all coming from a comedy point of view. Here was the opposite. Here we looked at the storyboards and the action sequences, but we had tremendous freedom as to what the characters would say, and we found a lot of that in the editing room or through improvisation, multiple cameras. And we just cut in stuff that we liked, and if it didn't get a laugh, it didn't, and if it did, it was sort of a welcome surprise. And so I've been gravitating more towards films that have a genre or something else that's the main attraction, because it allows my humor to be either work or not work, or be subtle, but I'm never going for hard funny. And then it found its own personality through the editing process, and then we did it with the second one, and as other filmmakers came on board, I think Kevin continued to hire people, not because they had visual effects chops or because they had a background in action, but because they had an interesting voice and had a very specific sense of humor. And you see it's different in all movies, although it does share tones with this. Joss's films feel a little bit different than Peyton's, and you have James Gunn, and everybody has their own flavor of ice cream, as do the actors. And the actors really inhabit the roles too. They're not afraid to hire people who have strong personalities that they bring to the role because they cast them so well. So I think it comes down to the casting of the filmmakers and the casting of the actors. And of course, the one through line is Kevin is very involved creatively in it. And I think that as he probably helps guide these filmmakers through the process, in the back of his mind, this was kind of the pilot for the Marvel series, and so all of it feels consistent as the franchises unfold. And the balancing act is, how do you make it feel consistent so all those characters can come together and not feel like they're from completely different worlds, but make each one feel unique and original, so that when Ryan comes on, he could tell a personal story, and when James Gunn could come on, he could do a space opera, and they all feel different, but there is a unifying spirit to it that has to do, I think, to a large part by the infrastructure and Kevin's leadership.
Let's talk about Robert and casting Robert. I think there are a couple, people in film history. You think of Sean Connery and James Bond, and Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, and Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. They're so iconic. What was the casting process? Because I think it's hard to forget that Robert Downey Jr. 10 years ago was a very different place. He wasn't the massive movie star that he is now, and he wasn't necessarily the obvious choice.
Not if you ask
He's
him.
an amazing.
He really was the same guy.
He was exactly the same guy, and when he came, we can talk about it, he ended up auditioning for it. He came in a car with his Team Downey crew, holding his suit, primary press suit. I was like, Team Downey, he has a team? Who are these people? He was as ready for stardom as any human being who's ever existed. He knew he was capable of it, he knew he deserved it, and he knew what to do with it once he got it.
I remember reading some interviews, like when Johnny Depp broke out with Pirates, there was something with Downey, and he just said, I'm talented enough, I could be that guy doing these giant movies, but he wasn't really doing anything at that moment.
Well, he was right, and we talked about Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, which at the time was revel, and people forget that he had not done necessarily before.
I don't think he'd ever had a
before that.
Before that.
No,
Yeah.
And that was an inspired bit of casting at the time, and I remember thinking, the expectations game. I always knock wood. I never take anything for granted. And as I was beginning to try to sell people outside of our inner group on Downey, I remember saying, I think it could be kind of, it could be kind of inspired like Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. It won't be that big, but it'll be like that.
I had a project around that time that I was writing, and when he got cast in this, I remember, we were trying to cast this other character, writing the director in the studio. I was like, oh my god, Robert Downey Jr., he's amazing. Man's probably he's gonna be a big star next summer. He's trying to get him now. And the head of the studio wrote back, we're not making a fucking Robert Downey Jr. movie, Tim. Okay.
I know that it would not have happened at any other studio at that time. It wouldn't have, it was hard doing it here. This was, an idea that there were other people who were offered the part.
Can you talk about
Can
who
we
else
talk
you
about
guys
that
were
after 10
looking
years,
at?
or we still don't talk about that?
I don't.
We don't.
So, well, it never.
They turned us down, by the
It
way.
was more like there was lists of names
Yes,
and there were
yes.
feelers sent out, but
Yes.
there was never anybody that we felt. It was a bit of there was sort of the name game and lists and trying to
Right.
get your green light and it's equations and so it's not like we arrived on a name and we chased the name and then
Right.
they weren't interested.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the one person, because it was kind of a strange time, and it was a little bit like Moneyball, because there was a sense that it had to be made for a number, but because that number was low relative to what we were putting on the screen, there was ways of looking at it using ingenuity, not judging the elements, whether it's behind the camera or in front of the camera, by the standard metrics that the rest of the industry did. There were the same lists of names that everybody was going off of. They were all considered worth a certain amount of money. And if you really looked at the way these types of movies broke out, there was an aspect of the equation that wasn't really factored in, which was quality. It's always like, who's in it? What are they worth in this territory? What's the genre? What's the day that's coming out? What's the budget? What's the studio? Underlying material. And all the people had the same spreadsheets that they were working off of. There was a lot of math to it, and because we knew we had to get this movie made in a different way to get something on the screen that we were both proud of and delivered the scope that people had come to expect from the genre, we were able to reach out to somebody like Robert, who was quite frankly an undervalued asset. He was somebody who had more to offer than what his price was at the time, and because there was a certain cutoff to what we could spend, a lot of the people we weren't even considering because they were just out of our range. So we didn't even talk about a lot of the movie stars of the day. And then that equation, it became part of the Marvel way of making films, of hiring filmmakers who wouldn't normally be thought of. I mean, I wasn't on a list to do this kind of movie, and I think, especially the earlier ones, there's a lot of people who weren't on those lists either before a Marvel movie was an attractive thing. It wasn't something that you'd build a career on necessarily. That wasn't a fait accompli. But after the success run that they've had, it's become something where people seek to be part of that process. But in the beginning, you were, you had to be original in your thought of how to put the team together. And I think that's part of what made the personality of these movies so offbeat and unique at the time, although now it feels, a lot of people for 10 years have been watching music, it's hard to remember when it didn't really know what it was yet, and it was kind of discovering its own tone.
One of the great talents that Jon has always had in his career, starting with Swingers, which is still a classic and is quoted and I'm not going to butcher any of the lines now, but they've become part of our culture, which is astounding. And people still, I'm sure, scream at you on the street sometimes.
In Vegas, not here.
We did go to Vegas for Iron Man, as you just saw, and spent a couple nights there. And his friend Vince Vaughn came, and it was quite surreal. As we were shooting in the casino overnight. But he's always been able to identify things before anybody else does. And you see it now in the cutting edge work he's doing he did on Jungle Book, the unbelievable stuff he's doing on Lion King, talk about expectations. I have no doubt that'll be the biggest movie next year, in all seriousness. It's amazing. He has been able to do that. One of the things he did that was Marvel. And really saying these are the kind of things, I think some of it came out of your Zathura experience, but that these kind of characters and this kind of potential franchise is the future. I remember him saying that. I remember sitting in the conference room above that Mercedes dealership in Beverly Hills and saying, "All right, Jon, so we're gonna be together for the next 2 years. Bang this out." And he goes, "No." He goes, "Kevin, if this works, we'll be together for the next 10 years." And here we are.
I want to talk to you about one of my favorite filmmakers that we've had here a couple times. He's amazing. Is Richard Donner, who I know was one of your first jobs in Hollywood, and I assume he's kind of a mentor to you. What did you learn from working with him?
I worked with him, and I worked with his wife, Lauren Schuler Donner,
Yeah.
who was the producer on, among other things, X-Men, which is how I got involved in X-Men. How I got to Marvel was directly through them. I was attending this school 25 years ago, and I saw that a lot of my friends were getting internships, and I thought, well, that's what we should do. That's what that's what you do. You go get an internship and don't get paid for it. And they were interning in places I hadn't necessarily heard of, and I for some reason I was like, gosh, if I'm going to go work somewhere, I'd like to be somewhere that I knew and admired. And I went to the old Lucas building, which at the time was a relatively new Lucas building. And on the second floor, they had internships posted, and it said Donna Schuler Donner Productions at Warner Brothers. And it was solely my love of Superman and all the things Dick had done that I applied and ended up getting it. And by the way, that was the only resume I've ever filled out in my entire career, was to get that internship to Donner's company. And I filled it out, I think I went to a Kinko's. Is there still no, Kinko's doesn't exist. There's a FedEx thing. It's down there on Figueroa. I had to find a template for a resume to fax it in to Donner's company. And, it was really Lauren that I learned a lot from as she was producing a number of movies at the time. I did a movie called Volcano. Okay. By the way, starring Don Cheadle, who we went on to work with, and Tommy Lee Jones, who I went on to work with. Both of whom, when I first met them, said, we worked together before on Volcano, and they both went, oh yeah, that movie. And then we did, and then Lauren produced You've Got Mail with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, Nora Ephron that I worked on, and it was during that time that she had this project that not much was happening with, which was X-Men. And I started doing notes on it, and I started, they don't ask for your input. You just sort of start doing it and leave them on the desk and hope they take a look and find value in it. And soon after that, Bryan Singer was hired, and the team started to come together, and Lauren very graciously
In X-Men 151, yes. Wolverine actually wore the other costume.
They need an expert.
Were you a big comics guy?
I was a big movie guy.
Yeah.
That's sort of the only thing.
I mean, he's not going to answer because so he knows Marvel,
Yeah.
and has helped create the MCU and this new mythology that stands connected to but separate from the books. But he actually knows more about Star Trek and more yet about Star Wars. And yeah, that's right. So I remember when we were mixing this film, I got us into the archives at the ranch, right? So we're at the Skywalker Ranch, and there's a building that they claim doesn't even exist, but it does. And hopefully all that stuff eventually will be at the museum going and across the street here. But so you have the archives, and George Lucas understood from the beginning that he was creating something special, and so he saved everything. And so it's like in Indiana Jones where they put the Ark away at the end, that big cavernous warehouse where everything is meticulously documented and filed away. And if you get in there, there are curators that are there in this temperature-controlled, actually double warehouse, with all the costumes, all the paintings, the matte paintings that are done on glass shower doors, and everything, the models, the Imperial cruisers. But then there's a lot of very obscure stuff that some things, that's a lightsaber, that's R2-D2, like I knew that. And then I would walk around with him and with the people who work there, and I would ask them, and they'd be like, let me look it up. He says, that would be the drum from the special edition of the Return of the Jedi. He was like, he turned into a comic book guy from The Simpsons there, and he knew every single thing. And I was like, this is astounding, like a Jeopardy contestant. And everything about Disney, too, by the way. You're a big Disney
I knew a lot about the Disney parks beforehand. That was the secret. I knew all that stuff about Star Trek and about Star Wars. I learned a lot of it on the fly about Marvel. I knew by osmosis things about X-Men from the cartoon series, things about Spider-Man from the pajamas when I was a kid. But I learned a lot. But what I always wanted to do was build a mythology like Star Wars and like Star Trek, cinematically.
And we used a lot of the Star Wars stuff. If you look at the wipes
The
here.
wipes are stolen right out of Star
There's
Wars.
a lot of stuff here. We were referencing Star Wars a lot. As a matter of fact,
There's a Look Sir Droids moment in,
That's right.
that's what it is.
That's right.
When Raza picks up the front, the helmet.
The Mark
It's
I
the
helmet.
Mark I
Indiana
faceplate.
Jones gunshots, isn't it? I noticed that, like the machine gun fire. It's
We have that. We have
like
the
Raiders.
Wilhelm scream in there. We have a lot of, we really paid homage. But when we were wrapping the film and we were doing the mix-up at Skywalker, he had given me the book. What was the name of it? I think it's called The Making of Star Wars. It has George and Luke in front of, and Mark.
Yeah, it's a
Hamill
big hardcover, the thick, definitive making of Star Wars that came out
in
about
front of the
10 years ago.
landscaper.
Yeah.
But it was all interviews that were done by their press people before the film came out. So extensive pages and pages of interviews, and all of them were like, I don't know if we're going to finish. It's a kiddie movie. I don't know if it's going to work, or they changed I wasn't supposed to die, and I died in it. I don't know what to say. I'm talking to a reporter. So it was like the most uncertain and honest and angst-ridden interviews, and especially with George, who was like scrambling to try to figure out how to make this all work. Because remember, George, what's different with George and with us is he was inventing all this stuff as he was going. And all the stuff I'm working on now is stuff he invented, whether it was CGI characters or digital photography or the edit droid or, all the stuff. I mean, you forget, or maybe you know, because this school, to some extent, is part of his legacy, but he really was inventing a car while he was racing one. And so, as difficult as we had it, he had it infinitely harder. And he was kit bashing costumes and sets and just getting barely enough to get through it. And Kevin gave me that book, and I was reading it, and I remember thinking, wow, wouldn't it be something if our movie turned out to be something people like and is remembered? But we had no idea. And it's amazing how that pattern repeats itself so much when people are on the cusp of doing something that ends up being one of the more significant pieces of their career. It feels just the same as when they nosedive too. You just don't know. You don't know. And it was nice that he gave me that book, because it gave me some more, it gave me faith and a feeling that able to visualize maybe this will turn out well, and maybe we'll finish this and people will dig it. Never having thought that here would be 10 years later as alma mater.
I was just excited we got to see all the Lucasfilm archives, and we have a picture of John and I on Hoth, which I think is amazing.
Well, this is a little side note, but I'm a huge Disney Parks fan, as I know you guys are. Kevin, have you been, Marvel's finally coming to the parks, how much of a part of that have you been, and how cool is that you grew up going to those things, and now you're actually creating land?
Yeah, it's the greatest. There's a Guardians attraction at California Adventure now. There's one under construction at Epcot. Epcot was my favorite park when I was a kid. I grew up in New Jersey. We'd go down to Disney World. But it's great, and I went a couple of times after park hours to test ride Mission Breakout, the new Guardians ride, and just walk around the park when it's closed. It's amazing. I found out the answer to how many times in a row can I ride Tower of Terror? 6.
That's awesome. Well, why don't we open up to some questions from the audience? That guy was really excited with the red shirt.
Thank you both so much for being here. One thing I just want to say is this movie 10 years ago convinced me to study film and go to film school and go on this path. And 10 years later, I'm working in one of the majors, and I credit that to you guys, so I can't thank you enough. One thing I wanted to ask you is, in studying both of your careers, I've seen kind of a moment for each of you where there was sort of like a turning point. With Jon, I know leading up to Swingers, you and your friends were actors, and you weren't really happy with the work you were getting, so you wrote this amazing script, and then that just kind of blew up. And then for Kevin, leading to this moment with Marvel Studios being its own company making this film, I'm imagining, looking back, it was a very exciting time, but in that moment, I'm sure it felt like, holy shit, what's happening? So I was curious if you could talk to that moment for each of you.
Well, for me, it was pretty simple. I had almost nothing to lose. There was a lot riding on it because the rights to 10 of our characters, the film rights to 10 of our characters, that was what was on the line. Marvel didn't put any money up front into the movies. This was a loan, and Marvel, the collateral was the film rights to 10 properties. So the worst that would happen is we wouldn't get to make another movie, and I'd try to go work somewhere else. And it was interesting because Avi Arad, who hired me and who had really believed in the notion of what Spider-Man could be and what X-Men could be, decided to leave. just before we started, as we were prepping Iron Man 1, he was doing other things, he was interested in other things, and he was sort of moving on. And there was a time when the then sort of head of Marvel, who's based in New York, was on a conference call, and he said, can we make these 2 movies? Can you deliver? And up to this point, all communication had gone through Avi. And Avi was now on his way out, and on speakerphone, the head of the company said, Kevin, can you deliver these 2 movies on time in 2 years? Yes. And from that moment on, it was just get them finished.
I forgot how weird that was.
Just finish them.
That was a weird thing, that it was, Kevin was sort of the exec that was, I knew him and liked him because we were the ones who kind of behind closed doors were like, we got to get Robert on this movie. You know, and that's kind of the first conversation we had, not in a big conference room. Because it was like, who are we going to get, all the things we talked about. And so we had a nice experience of having strategized. It took a long time to figure, okay, let's do a screen test and let's bring him in, and I'll talk to Robert, who was not about giving up.
Did you know him before then?
No, I met him in a meeting. It was one of those meetings also. A lot of the Marvel people had met him because I think he'd come in for Fantastic Four or something, Dr. Doom.
Not that that's the first I've heard that. I don't know, maybe Fox.
He had a lot of the people who were there were like, oh no, we knew him already from, and he wasn't like, nobody really thought he was going to be a contender for it. And I met with him, and he was like, he had the fire in his eyes. He was like, I'm ready. This is me. And he was clearly, it's like what Kevin describes. He was ready to be a star. He had done the work. He had gotten to the point in his life where he was ready to move forward, and just was out of his own way and was ready to make a run at it. And I was a believer, and and then his body of work, of course, everybody loved him. Perfect on so many levels for it. Everybody acknowledged that. And then we, were told he's not going to be the guy. I told him.
Who's telling you that? So did Paramount have to sign off, or
no?
Where
It
was
was
the?
more.
No, Paramount didn't have to sign off on it, and I had one conversation with a then exec at Paramount saying, because we were navigating this relationship with Paramount, we had all of the creative control. That's the whole reason we were doing this. But I'm always interested in being a good partner and collaborating. And I sort of floated by this exec, I think we were kind of leaning towards Robert Downey Jr. And he was silent and said, have you thought about this person, this person, this person? And I went, yeah, I'm not going to run stuff by him anymore. But there was a great fear. I mean, the people who were in charge of Marvel at the time believed in this, got this financing, let us do what we were doing. But they didn't work on movies, they didn't know anything about movies. So they knew one thing and one thing only about Robert Downey Jr. He went to jail. He wasn't insurable for a while. He was the most famous troubled actor in history. And we're going to put the entire future of our studio behind this guy? Forget it. Forget it.
And he had a lot of good years. He'd already, as far as, that was perception, but he had done a number of films.
Just because Bang Bang
worked his way up. Quite a few, yeah.
Well, he was insurable by that point. It wouldn't have worked otherwise.
Right.
And he did something which people forget but was a genius move on his part and his agent's part, because it let me use it as ammunition years later, which was he was the villain in the Tim Allen remake of Disney's The Shaggy Dog. Nobody remembers this. But I got to say to the Marvel board, no, of course, he's insurable. And this was before we were Disney. Disney hired him. Disney hired him to be in the Shaggy Dog movie. And that at least opened the door enough to do this screen test.
So, and I told Robert it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. He was like, with all due respect, you're wrong. He said, I am going to be Tony Stark. I was like, great. Like I said, if you have the stomach for it, I will not give up until you give up, and we will try. But it's going to take patience, and that's when we were talking, and that's when the idea of let's do a screen test came up. And once you let Robert get on the court, I mean, you couldn't even, there was no way to even argue it. So whatever misgivings there might have been from the time he opened his mouth as Tony Stark, whoever was on the fence, completely supportive of him. There was everybody at Marvel, all the people that were, wringing their hands and considering all the things Kevin's talking about all were believers. And honestly, for me, it was so important because as I was trying to figure out what the movie was, the script was being worked on, the set pieces, storyboards, all these moving parts, the idea of Robert playing Tony, I understood every decision that had to come out of it. And so when you talk about what's the moment, yeah, writing Swingers was something I did because I had final draft and I just started messing around with it. And then I just kept saying no to people who wanted to do something. So it was like it wasn't like a thunderclap, but I'd say one of the big ones, if you look at the good ones in your life, one of the big ones was getting Robert to be in it. Even though it was, and I think that was a moment for Kevin, for myself, clearly for Robert, and everybody involved, because I think if you pull that one thread, I don't know that it would. I can't imagine how you get this whole thing that was built without that one decision, because I think that was the one it all rests on. I think Robert's personality and his creative, his tone, and it's not just you talk about us, but really you're forgetting it wasn't like he just stood on his mark and said what we handed him. He's not, he was part of that thing. It was a process, and he brought all the energy that he had grown up around his dad and all the films he had done, the independent films. He brought all that to bear here, and it was just a point where we're all ready to kind of meet in the middle. So I think that was the moment that changed everything for me. But you need a few of those moments in a life, but that was one of the big ones.
Did you, something I was curious about, did you always want to direct, or was that something that gradually came, because you started as an actor, obviously.
I thought eventually I would, as an actor, I would get enough clout as an actor maybe to be able to do my own stuff, but it wasn't like I wanted to be a director. I used to make movies when I was little, but I didn't think it was a realistic option at all. It was always something I would love to do. I mean, I was an usher in the RKO Keats in Flushing, and now, and the first movie that was there was Return of the Jedi, and now I'm making Star Wars shows for, working and knowing George Lucas and getting to play in that sandbox. And so, but when you can't connect, it doesn't connect even in your mind where I'm from, that's even a possibility. But as I look back on it and I think about what it would feel like if I knew then where I could be, I'm so happy and grateful that I was able to have that trend, because I work really hard because I love working. I love everything I do, like not how it comes out, but the process of doing it. I enjoy even the failures. I love crashing into it every day because I'm just around so many smart people. All the new technology is being shown to me and presented to me. All these great filmmakers and other people to collaborate with, people to give me advice, and you're part of a great community, and it's just, I can't overstate how grateful I am for the types of projects and people that I work with. And it's really, it's a super special thing to find something that you love doing and getting the opportunity to do it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, applaud. That was great. Kevin, I was always curious. Sorry, I'm gonna get back to you guys. Kevin, I was always curious with you too. When you were at USC, what did you envision your career to be? Did you always want to be a producer? Did you want to write? Did you want to direct? Like, what were you thinking?
I wanted to do all those things. I just wanted to be in the room where it happens. I mean, that's to quote Mr. Manuel. It is. That's really what I wanted, and that's what I started getting at the Donner's Company. And I knew, of course, Dick Donner from all of his work. Lauren, I got to know more and got to see the fun of doing multiple projects at the same time. And Dick would do a movie every few years, and Lauren would do a couple movies a year. And I started to see how fun that was, which is what sort of led us to where I am. But it was, I would sit in this room and watch filmmakers. I just wanted to be a part of it at any level.
It's getting late, so we'll take a couple more. Who's got a good question? All right. Oh, well, this one here, yes. Your friend is very enthusiastic for it.
Hi, thank you guys so much for coming. Something that's really special about these movies is that they help to create this group genre into more like a viable artistic form of filmmaking. And as filmmakers, how can you balance putting in your own personal heart and soul and what your filmmaker point of view is, and keeping the expectations of the character and comics and the fans?
I think there's if everybody heard the question, how do you balance personal with what's expected of
Yeah.
the genre, right, and of the characters? I think some of it is just gut, following what you feel, but that's just a way to say that you're using a different part of your brain than the front. I think that there's a lot of, and then those of you who are in school here too, the more you can learn about storytelling and myths and archetypes, it's what led me down the path, because I was interested, I like Star Wars. Star Wars got me into samurai movies. All of that got me into Joseph Campbell. I watched The Power of Myth when it was on VHS with Moyers and Campbell at the ranch. And I just familiarized myself with that, and now I continue to learn about that, because I think that characters like these and genres like these have a form. There's a form to it, and so that form creates boundaries and parameters. And for you to actually, it's like music or anything else, there's a structure to it, and that structure creates a tension between the freedom and the containment. It's the balance, and that's part of art. Like any type of artistic endeavor, I find works best when there's a tension between two different things, because you want to do anything, but yet you have to contain that thing. And so the superhero films, and as we talked, I really had to learn from talking to Kevin about, okay, let's talk about villain stories. What type of villain stories are there? What have you done in all the movies you've worked on before? What's fresh that you haven't done? And so I was picking his brain a lot, and I was creating rules from it. So like, for example, with villains, there's two basic villain stories. One where you're going after the villain, and one is where the villain's coming after you. Like, as simple as that, but that's a rule. And let's talk about the opportunities and possibilities for each one. And we already did one kind of like that in Spider-Man 2, or we already did. And so you're trying to avoid repeating yourself in a very limiting genre in certain ways, because it's a 3-act structure. It's going to be an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And there are certain archetypes that you're dealing with these heroes. And so you play that tension against the form. And like, I like everybody, I don't know that people appreciate Ryan Coogler enough, because certainly, everybody sees Black Panther as, look, he played with the form and found a way to bring a lot of personal perspective to it. But you really look at Creed, that's the one to me that blows my mind. Because he made a Rocky movie with Rocky in it that was really good, and like it was as good as any Rocky movie, So he found the rules of the Rocky movie. Not just a fight movie, but a Rocky movie. And I grew up with Rocky. Like I was in '76, I was seeing it in the theater. And for this young guy to be able to find that way to find his perspective on it, after telling a very personal story with Fruitvale before. So not only could you tell a personal story, but then you could fit into those two things. And so as a filmmaker, I look at that and say, that's on a very impressive level, because you're not just expressing yourself, you're expressing yourself within a style and a form. And so as I get older, I really love to explore form and explore myth and explore old stories, not just in film, but in other, what are the expressions that we like to see played out as a group on the screen? It's not that, it predates film. And so the more you can learn about that stuff, I think the more you could bring your personal to bear, because you have a container for it.
Let's take like 2 more, and then we'll let these guys go home.
We'll answer shorter. We'll get more questions.
No, I appreciate you guys staying.
First off, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the last 10 years, and I'm going to call it for the next 10 years. When I saw Iron Man 10 years ago, my bike was stolen the night before, and when I went to see it, it was in the parking lot, and I stole it back. So, I've waited 10 years to tell you that. But my question, though, and I won't spoil the latest Marvel romp for anyone that hasn't seen it, but did you know 10 years ago making this, did you always have where we're at right now in the MCU in mind? Was that always a end goal to this current snappy ending? Or did you find it as you go?
Well,
I would say
The
it.
short answer is yes.
In general, yes. The specificity of it, not necessarily. But that's why Nick Fury came out at the end of this movie.
Of course. Right.
Was to say that. At that point, it was, could we just do a Cap movie? Could we just do a Thor movie? And the Avengers movie was the far, far, far off
That was
dream.
that was
the far off dream.
That was the one. But we
Yeah.
knew that with those people, it could be that. But this guy can answer that question.
Well, this was after Avengers, and Joss added the little Thanos tag. It was how do we start to build there, and how do you top Avengers? How do you get back to an individual character stories after Avengers, and how do you keep building from there? Were the two difficult things as we went through phase 2 and phase 3. But certainly the dream on this was deliver it on time. That was the dream.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you about that too, because it's become such a staple of Marvel movies. Can we talk about the creation of the tag? Like, I heard a great story about you when you were young and that you loved watching the names in the credits.
Yeah.
And Ferris Bueller?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's Ferris Bueller. There was a Masters of the Universe classic with Frank Langella as Skeletor. Comes out and says, "I'll be back," and then freeze frames for some reason. So I thought, why did freeze frame right that second? Did Frank Langella come out and go, "I'll be back, forget it, I'm not doing this"? Why are you? And they just had to freeze it right out. I don't know why it was a freeze frame. But I loved having little, and we were by no means the first films to do that. But it was always fun. And the Nick Fury idea in particular that came up, and we shot it secretly on a Saturday, and Sam we drove the car onto the stage, and it leaked like the Monday. But
we cut it out of the premiere.
right.
So everybody who was saying that it leaked, they were all called liars online, like all the bloggers, because we didn't show it in the premiere, and that was like a week or two before the movie came out. And they were swearing, "No, it really is in there, I'm telling you," and it sounded insane. And then of course the movie had it, but we really went out of our way. And by the way, the Nick Fury thing was a big part of when Kevin started this version, the Marvel Studios, was that I think he was frustrated by how little concern the studios had with the fan base, because they were seen as a very small part of the movie-going public, and they were going to come anyway because they were going to see a movie because it's based on their superhero. And all the effort was getting the people who weren't into the movies, or into the books, to come see it, make it accessible to other people. And part of their mission statement was, no, we're going to stay true to the books and stay true to the mythology that was developed. And it was really fortuitously timed, because it was also as social media and the internet was starting to heat up, because I don't know that this could have worked without it. And so you had Comic-Con, but you also had communities forming and people discussing things and people of like opinions. And when I was growing up, maybe there'd be a couple people in the lunchroom that felt the way you did, but when all those groups could get together, they're discussing it, and the real ground roots support starts to swell. And so Kevin and the Marvel team were rewarded for this approach. And the Nick Fury thing was just meant to be an Easter egg for people who read the Ultimates. Like, wouldn't it be cool for them after the credits, let's give them a big wink and say, thanks for paying attention and thanks for sticking around, and this isn't for everybody, this is just for you, because in the Ultimates, the way Nick Fury's depicted is based on Sam Jackson. And so we're like, what if we really get him? And then he's a big geek and a big fan of this stuff, and he's into Star Wars and into comic books, and so he came by and did it, and as Kevin said, it did trickle out, but it's still the impact of it. And then of course it turned into all these little casting choices that were flippant. I called Paul Bettany because I was in Wimbledon with him. He thought he had a good voice to play Jarvis. He did it over the phone. He never even watched the movie, he said, the first time. Now he's the Vision. It was so surreal. I visited him on the set when I was in London, and he was there in purple. And I just looked at him, and it was like right where we had shot. I think it was on the same stage as we shot Wimbledon. I'm like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. Life is weird. Clark Gregg was my neighbor. I begged him to do the cameo, and now he's got a TV series. And there's somebody else, and also Nick Fury turned into a 9-picture deal, too. And that was just supposed to be a little cameo that he did. I know he didn't get paid a lot for it. It was something he did out of love.
Yeah, and he always, Sam thinks ahead, so he knew that maybe it could go somewhere. But
He still claims that Mace Windu is still alive, and he's waiting for that phone call. He said George told him, he said, yeah, he's still alive. Anyway.
She's been dying.
Oh, yeah.
Also, big thank you guys all Spider-Man Homecoming. 6 times opening day, long story. But I was really wondering how the pre-production process has changed since Iron Man is shown now. Of course, it's an elaborate universe that you created. If there's a huge spreadsheet you go through with maintaining continuity, sort of what that process is like.
The question of pre-production. I think we may have two different answers.
well, what's the process of pre-production like? It is, as I was saying earlier, a lot of it formulated by working with Jon and following Jon's lead. And once you make a handful of films and deliver them on time, and they turn out well, you start to use that as a template on setting your timelines. Sometimes that bites you because oftentimes, because of actor availability or something happens, you end up getting a much shorter pre-production time or post-production time, but then you succeed and it works. And you go, oh well, look, we don't need all this time. So you have to battle that. I'd say the only thing that's really changed is when we were doing Iron Man, it was just Iron Man and then Incredible Hulk soon after that. Now there's just a lot more going on. But you have to keep that individual focus.
For me, there's a lot of opportunity presented by new technologies, and also I've learned a lot by learning as much as I can about the animation process. Animation tends to put more emphasis on pre-production, because often they'll develop very fully several projects and not greenlight one until they feel like the story's rock solid. And so everything is planned. And to the extent that I can, I do. And now, for the last couple of movies, I've had a head of story and a story department. And so I'm able to watch the movie in pencils like Walt Disney did before I ever, because the script, everybody can read it differently. But if you watch story reels, it's like watching the movie. And I'm really good at watching movies. I'm good at saying what's good and bad in the movie. So it's like you're creating a movie for you to pick apart. And I find that when you're sitting in a room, whether it's executives or actors or other creative types, when you all watch something, everybody tends to have a similar opinion about it. When you read a script, it's always different. So it's a way to get people on the same page creatively and guide them through. And now I've even been using for Lion King, virtual reality, building the sets and everything in VR and actually going to the places that are going to exist digitally. You know, back on Iron Man, a lot of it was we would plan it with pictures, maybe do some previs, shoot it in front of green screen and figure it out, the fine details of it in post-production. So for something like Lion
Some people still do it that way, John. What's great about Jon is, as I said, helping us pioneer what we were doing to begin with. But then he went off and pioneered a whole other level of technology. One of the early meetings we had on Infinity War was Jon coming in, sitting with Joe and Russo, our entire team, and walking us through kind of the new generation of
we've done on Jungle Book.
Yeah, it was amazingly gracious of Jon to do that.
All right, because it's getting late. I could listen to you guys all night. But who has one last great question? Who feels real? Oh, this woman back there, yeah. First time machine.
What year? 10 years ago? Probably buy Bitcoin, right? You wanted to know. Tesla.
That's what you tell your younger self.
No, I would say it's always going to feel just like this. Not going to change on the inside. Feels the same. You'll be just as scared and just as hopeful, and but just, don't worry. Really, honestly, don't get in your, just relax and let life unfold. That's the big one, because I feel the same way I did then, and you just have to change your disposition and trust things. But that's a little more existential than a career piece of advice. And then as far as improv and the
process. I think casting's the most important thing, so thank you for complimenting that. I think I think I'm really good at picking great people to work with in front of and behind the camera. I just try to get people that are smarter and more knowledgeable and more talented than I am, as much as, in every area, and I learn from them and listen to them, and I could manage that dynamic well. And I could bring in really talented people and help them all work together. But when it's really clicking, I'm not doing a lot. I'm just bringing great people together. And that's honestly the most gratifying part of it, is when you see it all happen and you could just sort of stand there and watch it all unfold. And then sometimes you got to jump in there and guide things a little bit, but when you do your job and you cast the right people, and then when they improvise, they say the right thing. And so it's about finding the right people and trusting them, and then sharing the credit, which I am doing now. Which I'm saying that everything here, and as a filmmaker, you get a lot of attention that you're the person, but you're kind of the front man to the band, or you're the conductor, but you're not playing any instruments. They're all playing it around you. And so being grateful for it and being generous with expressing how much others contribute.
Doesn't get better than that. I wouldn't go back in time and mess with my younger self, because I'm afraid I'd create a paradox. I'd screw something up and I wouldn't be here where I am now. I'd go back to 1955 and see if Mr. Sandman's really playing and the Texaco guys come and run around the car. That's what I'd do.
Well, let's give a big round of applause to Kevin and Jon. Thank you. And to quote the Marvel end credits, Kevin Feige will return next Thursday with Avengers with Joss Whedon.